Imagine this. You're driving alone on a cold, desolate highway late at night. The world around you is silent, the darkness pressing in from all sides. Suddenly, your headlights catch a figure standing by the roadside, a woman in a flowing white dress, her hand raised, silently asking for help. You stop, hesitant but unable to ignore her. But what happens next will chill you to your core. Join me as we dive into the spine-tingling tale of the mysterious woman on Route 66, a story that will make you think twice about late-night drives on lonely roads. Are you ready to face the unknown? Let's begin. The mysterious woman on Route 66. It was a bitterly cold night in the 1980s, the kind of night where the wind cuts through layers of clothing and the darkness feels oppressive. The vast emptiness of Route 66 stretched out before a lone truck driver named Jim, who had been hauling goods across Arizona. Jim was used to long, solitary drives through desolate landscapes, but tonight felt different. The road was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes even seasoned drivers uneasy. The headlights of his truck pierced through the darkness, illuminating only the asphalt ahead. Trees lined certain sections of the road, their branches twisted and skeletal against the faint moonlight. As he approached a curve, something caught his eye, a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. A woman dressed in a flowing white dress stood still, her hand raised in a gesture of need. Her long hair cascaded down her shoulders, catching the faint glow of his headlights. Jim instinctively slowed the truck, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. "What's someone doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" he muttered under his breath. She looked out of place, almost ethereal. A sense of unease settled in his chest, but he reasoned that leaving someone stranded on a cold night like this would be inhumane. He stopped the truck a few feet ahead of her and leaned over to open the passenger door. "Need a ride?" he called out, his voice gruff but kind. The woman stepped into the truck, her movements graceful and deliberate. She nodded her thanks but said nothing as she settled into the seat. Jim noticed her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and her eyes seemed fixated on the window, staring at the black void outside. "Where are you headed?" Jim asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. After a long pause, she replied softly, "Just ahead, near the bend." Her voice was barely audible, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. Jim couldn't help but glance at her every now and then. Her pale complexion, coupled with her old-fashioned attire, struck him as peculiar. He chalked it up to the strangeness of the hour and focused on the road. The drive continued in silence. Jim couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every so often he'd try to engage her in conversation, but her responses were clipped or non-existent. Her gaze never left the window. As they neared the bend she had mentioned, the woman finally turned to him. "You can let me off here," she said, her voice carrying an urgency that hadn't been there before. Jim slowed the truck to a stop and looked over to ask if she was sure. This part of the road was deserted, and there didn't appear to be any homes or businesses nearby. But when he turned to face her, the seat was empty. The woman was gone. Jim's heart raced as he scanned the cab, his mind racing to rationalize what had just happened. The door hadn't opened, and he hadn't felt the truck shift as if someone had exited. She had simply vanished. He stepped out of the truck and shone his flashlight around, calling out into the night. The wind howled in response, but there was no sign of the mysterious woman. Shaken, Jim climbed back into his truck and continued driving. The next morning, still troubled by the encounter, Jim stopped at a roadside diner to grab some coffee and clear his head. He recounted the strange event to the waitress, expecting to be met with skepticism. Instead, her face grew pale, and she exchanged a knowing glance with the cook behind the counter. "You saw her," the waitress said quietly, almost as if speaking the words aloud would invite trouble. "Who?" Jim asked, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "The woman in white," she replied, She's been seen before on that stretch of Route 66. They say she died in a car accident there years ago. Some folks claim she's looking for a ride to the place where it happened. Jim felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard tales of ghostly hitchhikers before, but he'd always dismissed them as urban legends. Now he wasn't so sure. The waitress leaned in closer. "You're lucky, you know," she added. "Most people who see her don't make it through the night. It's said she only appears to warn those in danger. Maybe you should be careful on the road ahead." Jim nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of her words. As he paid his bill and left the diner, he couldn't shake the image of the woman's vacant stare or the eerie silence that had filled the cab. For the rest of his journey, every shadow by the roadside seemed to take shape, and every gust of wind sounded like a whispered warning. Years later, Jim still recounted that night to fellow truckers, each of whom shared their own tales of mysterious figures on lonely roads. The woman in white became a story passed around campfires and truck stops, her tragic tale etched into the folklore of Route 66. But for Jim, it wasn't just a story. It was a chilling reminder that some roads are haunted not just by memories, but by the restless spirits who can't seem to let go. The haunted car on I-4. The I-4 highway in Florida had earned a sinister nickname over the years, the Cursed Highway. Legends of ghostly sightings, unexplained accidents, and eerie encounters plagued its reputation. At the heart of these tales was an ominous origin story. During the construction of the highway, an ancient burial ground was uncovered. Instead of properly relocating the graves, construction teams had carelessly built over the site, leaving the spirits restless. For taxi driver Mike Peterson, these stories were nothing more than urban legends. A man of reason, Mike scoffed at ghost stories. But one fateful night in 2003 would shake his skepticism to its core. Mike was working the night shift, ferrying passengers across Florida's bustling cities. The clock had just struck midnight when he dropped off his last fare and began the lonely drive back home. His route took him directly onto the infamous E4, a stretch of road he had driven countless times before without incident. The highway was eerily quiet that night, the usual hum of traffic replaced by an unsettling stillness. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Mike rolled down his window, letting the cool night air clear his mind. As he passed a particularly dark stretch of the highway, something caught his eye in his rearview mirror. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as the vehicle approached. It wasn't unusual to see another car on the road, but something about this one felt off. The car pulled up beside him, and Mike instinctively glanced to his left. What he saw made his stomach drop. It was an old car, a model straight out of the 1920s. Its polished exterior gleamed under the moonlight, but there were no headlights, no engine sounds, only an unnatural silence. Mike's taxi and the mysterious car drove side by side for several moments, and he couldn't help but notice the absence of a license plate. Curiosity outweighed his growing unease. He slowed down, hoping to get a better look at the driver. But as soon as he matched its speed, the car vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it dissolved into a swirling mist that lingered in the air before dissipating into the night. A sudden chill filled the cab, and Mike felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice trembling. The cab's temperature dropped noticeably, and his breath fogged up the windshield. Mike gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white as he scanned the road for any sign of the phantom vehicle. As he sped up to put distance between himself and the spot where the car had disappeared, his radio crackled to life. Static filled the cab, followed by faint, unintelligible whispers. Mike turned the dial, trying to find a clear frequency, but the whispers only grew louder. "Leave!" A distorted voice finally hissed through the speakers, Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled to turn off the radio. The moment he did, his phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the oppressive silence. He hesitated before answering, his hands trembling. "Hello?" Static greeted him, followed by the same whispered word. "Leave." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mike in a state of shock. He pressed harder on the gas pedal, determined to get off the highway as quickly as possible. When he finally reached a well-lit gas station, he pulled over and sat in his cab, breathing heavily. The warmth of the station lights did little to dispel the cold that had seeped into his bones. The next morning, Mike shared his story with fellow drivers at the taxi depot. Many dismissed it as exhaustion playing tricks on his mind, but one older driver, Frank, leaned in closer. "You saw the ghost car," Frank said grimly. "It's been around for decades. People say it's tied to the burial ground they paved over when they built this highway. They didn't just disturb the graves, they disrespected them." Frank went on to explain that the car often appeared to lone travelers late at night, a spectral reminder of the spirits that lingered on the cursed road. "Consider yourself lucky," Frank added. "Some people say seeing it is an omen. Those who try to follow it or stop where it disappeared end up in accidents, or worse." Mike couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. The next time he drove I-4, he did so during the day, avoiding the haunted stretch at night whenever possible. To this day, the story of the ghostly 1920s car remains one of the many chilling tales surrounding I-4. Drivers who dare to travel the cursed highway at midnight are warned to keep their eyes on the road and to ignore any strange cars that appear out of the darkness. For Mike, the memory of that night serves as a haunting reminder that some legends are rooted in truth, and some roads are better left untraveled. The shadow on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge-Tunnel. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge-Tunnel, a marvel of engineering connecting Virginia Beach to the eastern shore, was both a lifeline and a source of dread for many who traversed it. Stretching over 23 miles, the bridge-tunnel was surrounded by the vast, often ominous waters of the Chesapeake Bay. Stories of eerie encounters had circulated for decades, but for truck driver Danny Cooper, they were just that, stories. Danny had been a trucker for over 15 years and had driven across the bridge countless times, both during the day and night. He was no stranger to the eerie feeling of isolation the bridge evoked, especially during late-night hauls when the only company was the faint glow of his headlights on the road and the dark water stretching endlessly on either side. One autumn night in 2015, Danny was hauling a load to the eastern shore. It was past midnight and the bridge was quiet, save for the occasional gust of wind that seemed to howl against the structure. The night was cold and foggy, with visibility reduced to only a few meters ahead. As Danny drove deeper into the bridge tunnel, a sense of unease crept over him. He brushed it off as fatigue, rolling down the window to let the brisk air wake him up. About halfway across the bridge, something caught his eye. In the faint glow of his headlights, a dark figure appeared standing in the middle of the road, motionless. Danny's heart skipped a beat. "Damn it," he muttered, slamming on the brakes. The screeching of his tires echoed across the empty bridge as his truck came to a halt just feet away from the figure. Danny sat frozen in his seat, his eyes locked on the shadowy figure. It appeared to be a person, dressed in black, their face obscure. They stood unnervingly still, as though staring directly at him. After a few moments, Danny took a deep breath, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out of the truck. The wind howled louder as he approached the spot where the figure had stood, his boots echoing on the concrete. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying into the void. "You okay?" There was no response. He swept the flashlight beam over the area, his heart pounding in his chest. But there was no one there. Danny's eyes darted around, scanning the bridge for any sign of movement. The fog swirled around him, thick and oppressive, but the figure had vanished. Confused and unnerved, He turned back toward his truck, his pace quickening. As he climbed back into the cab, he glanced at his dashboard camera. He rewound the footage and played it back, his fingers trembling. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The camera had captured it clearly, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, staring directly at his truck. But as Danny approached, the figure didn't move. It simply dissolved into thin air, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Danny's breath hitched as he watched the footage again, hoping to spot some rational explanation. A trick of the light, maybe, or a smudge on the lens. But it was unmistakable. The figure was there, and then it wasn't. Shaking, Danny continued his journey, but the rest of the drive felt like an eternity. Every shadow in the fog seemed to shift and move, and every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. By the time he reached the eastern shore, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, but they brought little comfort. When he reached the truck stop, Danny shared his story with a few fellow drivers. Their reactions were mixed. Some laughed it off, while others grew quiet, exchanging uneasy glances. One older driver, Tom, leaned in and spoke in a low voice. "You're not the first to see something on that bridge," he said. "Years ago, there was a terrible accident there. A family's car broke down in the middle of the night, and a truck didn't see them in time. Killed them all on the spot. People say the spirits never left." Danny felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard about accidents on the bridge, but he'd never given much thought to the ghost stories that followed. Now he wasn't so sure. Tom continued, "They say if you see a figure on that bridge, it's a warning. Some folks ignore it and end up in accidents themselves. Others take it as a sign to be careful. Sounds like you got lucky." For weeks after the encounter, Danny avoided the Chesapeake Bay Bridge-Tunnel during his night shifts, opting for alternate routes whenever possible. When he had no choice but to cross it, he did so with his camera on and his nerves on edge. The shadowy figure haunted Danny's thoughts, a reminder that some roads hold more than just memories. They hold the echoes of the past, restless and waiting. For those who dare to drive the Chesapeake Bay Bridge-Tunnel at night, the question lingers. Will you make it across alone, or will you meet the shadow? Thank you for watching today's story. I hope these chilling experiences have made you reflect on fears and trust in life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more engaging stories and interesting content in the future. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.